No Paths Are Bound. A fan fiction by Cataclysmic Calamity. Handsome. Xie Lian begins to believe that Hong'er won't leave. That trust is terrifying at first, but it grows with every passing day. The boy keeps his distance when Xie Lian needs it, but he's always there. He accompanies Xie Lian to the fields, always insisting on taking the harder work for himself. Xie Lian learns where the food was coming from when he realizes that many of the people in town already know him, that the boy had already been doing work here and there, giving Xie Lian food that was meant for himself. He's stern then about making Hong'er keep his own share. The meat came from hunting, a tedious task, one that forced the boy to resort to learning how to make traps and snares. Xie Lian may not be good for much these days, but he mends a discarded bow, carefully teaching the boy how to use it. He doesn't notice the way Hong'er's fingers tremble when he adjusts them on the bowstring, teaching him how to adjust his grip. Xie Lian's thoughts are always occupied with function in those moments. Missing him, missing mooching. But he was useless to them anyway, a burden. When Hong'er makes his first shot, striking a rabbit in the eye, he crows with victory, jumping up and down. "Did you see me, Diansha? He freezes, awkward, horrified by his own thoughtfulness, and Xie Lian bursts with laughter, throwing his head back, clutching his belly. "No, but it sounds impressive." He can't remember the last time he laughed without wanting to cry. The boy's anxieties ease when his god's hand lands on top of his head, ruffling his hair. "Well done, Hong'er." He beams, his face a picture of happiness itself. The boy becomes quite the hunter, to the point where meat never becomes a problem. Xie Lian isn't much help with the cooking, but he can remove the pelts, sitting with Hong'er by the fire, telling him stories. The boy listens with rapt attention, never missing a single word. They bring the pelts to town in the morning to sell, or, with time, Xie Lian learns to sew them into a better pair of boots for Hong'er. He never complained. But the months are getting colder, and Xie Lian can sense that he's getting taller. His old things probably didn't fit. They honestly aren't special, but they're sturdy. You would think that Xie Lian gave Hong'er his weight in gold by the way he responds. And in moments like that, the god doesn't feel useless. The nights grow cold, and Hong'er is still sleeping on the steps of the shrine. It worries Xie Lian. His own body is sturdy, even in his banishment. It can handle a little cold, hunger, or injury. But Hong'er is still mortal. It frightens him, and the prospect of the boy falling ill fills him with dread. Xie Lian doesn't want to be alone again. Each night for a week, he tries to coax him into sleeping inside, near the fire at the very least. Hong'er comes in to tend to it, stoking the flames so his god won't catch a chill in the night. But he always leaves. In the end, Xie Lian only finds one solution. "Hong'er?" He always appears with near immediacy when the god calls. "Diansha?" "I'm cold." The teenager rushes forward, quick to stoke the coals, adding a little more kindling from the pile he chopped that morning. But it's no good, Xie Lian sighs, forlorn. "Could you just—" He slides over, making room on the bamboo mat for one more. "Sleep here?" Hong'er is frozen, his expression a mask of tempted longing, guilt, and anxiety that the god can see. "This one should really—" Please, Hongar? He swallows thickly. I'm still cold. The first night, he's as stiff as a board, sleeping on the very edge of the mat. Xie Lian isn't sure if he actually sleeps at all. The second and third nights are like that too. But eventually, he starts sleeping with his side lightly pressed against Xie Lian's back, with the intention of helping the god keep warm, even if he never relents about getting under the blanket with him. It isn't perfect, but he's inside, near the fire, and Xie Lian sleeps easier. He's never shared a bed before, and he finds comfort in it now. It isn't lonely. Over time, he scolds Hongar enough times for using his title that the boy eventually starts calling him Gugger. Shyly at first, like he's worried Xie Lian might find it overly familiar, but the god never seems to mind. Banishment stops feeling like such a punishment now. There's joy in watching Hongar grow. He's still a gangly teenager, just like he was the first day Xie Lian tried to touch him in the shrine. But he's gaining weight, starting to get a little taller. He whines with embarrassment when his voice starts cracking, going silent. But Xie Lian finds it endearing, pleading for the teenager to stop being so shy. After all, the silence can often become a little too much for him, and, however awkwardly, his companion always relents. And after everything he's done, Hongar still expects nothing in return. It bothers him when he needs Xie Lian's help. He sulks for an entire afternoon when the god has to help him fend off a group of teenage bullies from the next village over. And sure, it must be embarrassing to be saved by a blind man. But it seems to run deeper than that. He always lunges in front of the god at the first sign of danger, often only to find himself pulled behind Xie Lian as he deals with whatever small-time criminal or low-level demon has decided to cause them trouble. And after, he always falls into an ill mood for hours at a time. Eventually, Xie Lian comes to understand. Hongar wants to protect him. It seems a little silly. After all, there's little left that could hurt the god now. But it makes him smile. That's when he starts teaching him more than just archery. He notices that the teenager isn't completely without skill, that there's clearly already some experience already there. Hongar explains he was a foot soldier in the war, that he picked up a few skills here and there. Xie Lian smiles sadly. It explains his skill, yes. It also explains why the plague spared him, and the knowledge of that, the things Hongar must have had to do when he was still so young. It hurts to think about. Xie Lian forgets so often now that he was young back then too. They might be sparring with sticks, but the boy shows a strong natural inclination for offense. Xie Lian comments he would be suited to sabers, and something about that makes the child smile. The next time the god has to defend him, and Hongar is left scowling, Xie Lian smiles, reaching down to ruffle his hair. He doesn't have to reach as far down now as he did before. If you train hard enough, one day you'll be able to return the favor and save me next time. That doesn't make the sulking go away, but it certainly seems to light a fire under the teenager. Xie Lian also comments at some point, with a forced tone of cheerfulness, how much girls like that sort of thing. Having skills like that will help Hongar find a wife one day. Statements like that always seem to make the teenager scoff, and Xie Lian isn't surprised. He was that age once. Things like romance seemed far off, silly. The only thing that seemed to matter was his cultivation. The whole thing feels so ridiculous now. I don't want a wife. Xie Lian smiles faintly. Of course, he feels that way now, and the fallen prince is selfishly happy about it while it lasts. He doesn't want Hongar to be alone, doesn't want him to have nothing, but part of him not having anyone else, it means he still needs Xie Lian. He's often ashamed of feeling that way. He should want Hongar to have people in his life that love him. Xie Lian should want the teenager to grow into a man, to have a life of his own. But growing up, that might mean outgrowing Xie Lian too. That terrifies him. Xie Lian wants him to be happy. The affection he's developed for his companion in the last year is deep, meaningful. He doubts that Hongar realizes it, but Xie Lian has come to adore the boy. But he's so afraid of being alone again, fumbling in the dark. Still, he smiles. You'll change your mind one day. He reaches out to ruffle Hongar's hair again. Something that always used to make the boy preen happily, but he shrinks away from it now, irritated with being treated like a child. The child Xie Lian desperately wants him to always be. I won't, he mumbles, stubborn. I don't need anybody but Dianxia. Oh, Xie Lian feels so horrible for the happiness in his chest, the relief, that even if those are the words of a child, it means Hongar still is one, that Xie Lian gets to feel needed for a little longer. But there are things he can't see. Xie Lian finds himself wondering, after all, the boy is 16 now. He must be watching girls, even if he doesn't approach. Which ones does he like? Is he shy about it? Does he want to talk to them, but doesn't know how? Xie Lian is utterly useless in that regard. He's never wanted anyone in such a way. He's been on the receiving end of want and desires many times, but such things never interested him. And he was so far above everyone else back then. He never allowed anyone to reach for him. Xie Lian makes soft inquiries, needles him about it in a teasing voice, smiling softly. Hongar always sits against the opposite wall of the shrine, curled up into a ball, and Xie Lian never sees the way the boy watches him, cheeks flushed, biting his tongue. The god is kneeling on the floor, weaving. It's a skill he's picked up over time, one that he's developed a fondness for. It's slow, peaceful. Hongar will quietly indicate which color of thread he's holding, and the god uses the threads to create pictures in his mind's eye. And as Xie Lian works, he presses with a gentle smile. Have you really never pictured it? You must have some kind of idea of what sort of girl you want. Maybe if Xie Lian has some idea, he can brace himself for abandonment when such a creature appears. What if it isn't a girl? The prince falls silent, and he can hear the human's heart beating faster, likely afraid of the judgment, possible rejection he might face for admitting such a thing. Xie Lian isn't ignorant of the fact that there are men who love other men. There were moments when he said he never really wanted someone before. That was true, but he was still a teenage boy, even when he was training and focusing on his cultivation. He would feel flashes of warmth at times, especially when he found himself looking at Fengxian. It felt shameful, not knowing why the sight of his friend's body would bring this flooding heat in his gut, but knowing that he shouldn't be feeling that way. It frightened Xie Lian at the time. He knew that Mu Cheng caught him looking more than once. His other friend never said a word, but he reacted with quiet disgust, resentment even, and it only made the shame worse. But Xie Lian pushed the feelings down, recited his sutras, and eventually they stopped. His friendship with Fengxian was never affected. The other teenager never knew what Xie Lian had been feeling. But Xie Lian knew then cultivation was his only option forward in life, that it gave him an excuse not to look at people. And even if he was different, no one would ever know. He would never become a source of shame for his parents if he never had a wife or children. When a man chooses to forego women for no reason, people whisper. When he does it out of a devotion to faith, people admire him. No one ever considered Xie Lian's choice of cultivation paths to be intentional. It was just the method that Guoxie happened to practice. With that, Xie Lian didn't feel like he was lying or hiding from anyone. Only himself. His pride made such things necessary back then. He never quite forgave himself for being different. But as his life became dominated by other problems, other worries, there was no room left for those feelings. And after that, he was alone. He never found himself needing to think about it again. He nearly forgot. But now, when he remembers the shame, the quiet fear that used to consume him at night, nearly hyperventilating as he fought the feeling between his legs, denying it, whispering to himself that it wasn't like that there was nothing wrong with him. He doesn't want that for Hongar. Xie Lian isn't blind to what it means to be worshipped, knows that if he tells the boy something is so, that Hongar will believe it with all of his heart. If Xie Lian could have done that for himself, he would have been spared so much shame. That doesn't change anything. He keeps his chin held high, even as his fingers tremble slightly, struggling to pull the threads together. Loving someone is the most beautiful thing a person can do. Hongar's eyes never leave his face. He hardly even breathes. Man or woman, it's still meaningful. The silence that follows is one of petrified hopefulness, and when Hongar speaks again, he does so with a cautious happiness that breaks Xie Lian's heart. Does Gege really mean that? He's well practiced now when it comes to smiling through pain. With all of my heart. Hongar's fingers are digging into his shins through the fabric of his pants, his eyes as wide as they can possibly be. Even now, he has no hope of his affections ever being returned, but now he knows that they wouldn't be a source of disgust, that it isn't something shameful. He swallows thickly, hugging himself a little tighter, because loving someone, Hongar loving someone, no matter who that someone is, Xie Lian thinks it's something beautiful. Hongar doesn't love quietly. He can't. He loves with every breath, with every part of him. He's always been over-emotional, lacking in self-control. He can't stop himself from feeling things. They just consume him. And when loving someone is everything that he is, having the world tell him that love was shameful, it made every part of him feel shameful, sinful. And how could he ever expect love from God, or even just acceptance, when with every bone in his body, Hongar knew that he would always be a sinner? His tears fall silently, but they don't come from sadness. Is it a man? The boy looks up with a start, and Xie Lian smiles. If there was someone you wanted, I mean. He's quiet, blinking until the tears stop, waiting for his breathing to become a little more even before he answers. It doesn't matter to me either way. Xie Lian tilts his head to the side. Man or woman, Hong-ar explains. They're the same to me. Xie Lian pauses, considering, and eventually he smiles. I see. His fingers are a little steadier now, weaving the threads together. But when you picture the sort of person you want, you must imagine something, right? Knowing the god can't see, Hong-ar allows his eyes to drift over Xie Lian's shoulders, the long curtain of dark tresses that pool on the ground around him. Hair, he mumbles, his face hot. The boy is rarely so tongue-tied. I like longer hair, I guess. Xie Lian's smile is patient, affectionate. Hong-ar, most people have long hair. The teenager squirms, pressing his legs tighter against his chest. But it has to be soft, he mumbles. Shiny. Not everyone's is like that. Well, that is true. What else? Gugu. He sounds so embarrassed. Xie Lian can't stop his smile from widening just a little. It's sweet. No, it's cute, actually. Unexpected from a young man who rarely ever seems shy about anything. Tell me, please? The teenager rubs his cheek with a groan. Not short, he admits slowly, but not too tall either. That's a bit of an odd description. Well, it's fine if they're taller than me right now, Hong-ar explains without thinking. I'm still growing. He pauses, realizing how odd that sounds, adding in a rush, hypothetically. It's a credit to Xie Lian's own stupidity when it comes to these things that he doesn't realize, laughing softly. For someone who didn't even want to talk about this, it sounds like you've thought about it a lot. I haven't, Hong-ar whines, sounding horribly sheepish. Really? The prince's smile is good-natured. Anything else? Smart. Hong-ar's chin presses against his knees. Strong, kind, brave. Those things are the most important. Xie Lian's smile falters just a little. Those are some pretty high standards, Hong-ar. The teenager shrugs, sounding completely unbothered. I'm not worried about it. Finding such a person might be difficult. The sheepishness seems to be retreated, replaced by that stubborn sense of certainty. I'm really not worried about it, Diansha. Xie Lian frowns. Some selfish part of him is happy. After all, Xie Lian has seen a little bit too much of the world by now. He knows that someone kind, intelligent, brave, and generous, they probably don't exist. If this was only about hair and height, things would be easier. But he finds himself caught between relief and not wanting Hong-ar to be disappointed when he doesn't find such a person. After all, the only person Xie Lian can think of that might check all of those boxes would be Hong-ar himself. And he's a rare, precious thing. Xie Lian often suspects that the teenager has the potential to ascend. With each passing week, he becomes more and more sure that he will. And when he does, he won't need Xie Lian anymore. He'll have his own purpose for living. He won't need the things that he did before. And then he'll be alone again. Maybe if he was a little less selfish, he would order Hong-ar to leave his side. He'd have a better chance of ascension that way. Or, at the very least, he might find someone, a man or woman, to share his life with. Hongar deserves that. But Xie Lian is a coward, and he can't. He's learned what it feels like to sleep next to someone every night, that he doesn't need fine silks or golden palaces just for someone to listen when he speaks, to laugh with him. And he's so afraid of giving that up. He doesn't notice that the boy never shows interest in talking to people his own age. He never makes friends in the village, even when Xie Lian reassures him that it's all right, that he can go and enjoy himself. Hongar always refuses, remaining rooted to his side like ivy on stone. Even when he does relent to Xie Lian's demands to socialize even a little, making small conversations with the other teenagers when they're in the market selling animal pelts or walking back from the fields, Xie Lian notices something. Hongar doesn't like to be touched. One of the other boys will give him a playful smack on the back, and Xie Lian can sense the venom in Hongar's glare in response. Girls smile and fawn over how strong his arms are, but when they reach out to touch him, the teenager jerks away sharply. It gives the god pause. Ever since the day he learned his companion's name, he's always been affectionate with Hongar. Well, what Xie Lian would call affectionate anyway. He grew up in a palace, tended to by servants. His parents loved him, but physical shows of love were rare, given sparingly. The fact that Xie Lian is prone to ruffling the boy's hair, less now, since Hongar seems to dislike it, giving him the occasional hug even, is a sign that the prince has come to view Hongar as something close to family. Now he wonders if the teenager is only tolerating it. He becomes much more careful with his touches, more than aware of the imbalance of power in their relationship. Hongar worships him, and if something makes him uncomfortable, Xie Lian knows the teenager won't tell him. He has to be more thoughtful, more considerate of him. Xie Lian never realized how much it would upset the boy. Not at first, but eventually, as weeks of this passed, and Xie Lian smiled, congratulated him on a job well done, but not reaching for him, patting his head, or pulling him into a hug, Hongar can't stand it anymore. He's gotten so good at controlling his voice, hiding his feelings from his god as best as he can, even when his hands are balled into fists at his sides, trembling with emotion. Gogo? He glances up from where he's gathering firewood, a gentle smile in place. Yes? But now, Hongar can't hide the pain in his voice, the fear. Has this servant offended you? Xie Lian's face falls. It's been months since the boy called himself a servant. No, he shakes his head, setting down the wood in his hands. Why would you say that? Hongar hangs his head, almost ashamed to vocalize it, because if he gives voice to the reason for his worry, the god might begin to understand what he really... In that sense, he's vastly overestimating Xie Lian's understanding of such things. This one never expects anything of His Highness, Hongar mumbles, and Xie Lian's frown only deepens, because the teenager is always reverent of him, but when he's upset, such reverent words are usually a sign that he fears rejection. I know, Hongar. The boy swallows hard. Gogo has been far away from me lately. Xie Lian tilts his head to the side, thinking about it. He's always been prone to fits of daydreaming, but that isn't new. He doesn't think he's been quiet either. I don't understand what you mean. Hongar's hands tremble. "This one means it literally," he mumbles, heart beating halfway out of his chest, expecting the worst sort of answer, but nothing could hurt quite so much as thinking his god was angry with him. "Physically." Xie Lian pauses, his lips forming a perfect O. "Hongar." The teenager doesn't look up, and the god is caught in place, stumped. "That wasn't because I was angry with you. You hadn't done anything wrong." It's a relief, but Hongar still shrinks. "I just thought you were getting too old for that sort of thing," Xie Lian admits. That makes the young man freeze, eyes snapping up with confusion. "Too old?" Xie Lian laughs a little awkwardly, rubbing his hand against the side of his neck. "You seemed like you didn't want to be treated like a child anymore, and you never let anyone else touch you." "That's different!" Hongar never interrupts him, but now he does, his voice sharp, words coming out in a rush. "I never mind when Gogo touches me." Xie Lian frowns, glancing away from him, his stomach twisting with anxiety. "You don't have to say that. I wouldn't." He lets out a heavy sigh. "I wouldn't be upset with you for telling me that something made you uncomfortable. I would only be upset if I found out you didn't tell me because you didn't want to upset me." As a prince, he was used to people lying to him about such things. Muqing did that the most, and it created this overwhelming sense of anxiety after, when Xie Lian had lost everything. He doesn't want to be lied to, while the ones who follow him build up silent resentment. If he's crossing a line, he wants to know, so he doesn't end up alone again. "I'm not lying," Hongar pleads, his voice low, frightened, but forcing himself to speak out nonetheless. "If Gogo doesn't want to touch me, I don't expect it. But if he does," Xie Lian bites his lip, hesitant. "I do," he admits. "It's hard when In most ways, he's adjusted to life without his sight. There's still the occasional trip up, but in a practical sense, Hongar has bridged nearly all of the gaps. But it's hard when you can't see the person beside you, something as small as the weight of Hongar's hand. The amount of comfort it brings Xie Lian is hard to describe. The gentle reassurance that he isn't alone, that someone is there. When I can't see the world the way everyone else does," Xie Lian finishes. "But it's all right." He forces a smile, bright but strained. "I don't need Hongar to force himself." He can't finish the sentence, and then he's just frozen with shock. A pair of arms have wrapped around him, holding him tightly, and Xie Lian is hesitant at first, realizing he's never really been held before, not like this. Hongar is clinging to him. Not so different from the day he told Xie Lian his name. But he's Xie Lian's height now. The god hadn't realized. How did he grow up so fast? And instead of weeping in Xie Lian's arms, accepting his reassurances, it's actually the opposite. Xie Lian is slow, hesitant to lay his head on the human's shoulder, cheek pressing against the collar of Hongar's shirt. The only other person he was probably close to like this was his mother, and instead of silk dresses and perfume, his face finds threadbare cotton, and Hongar smells like the forest, pleasantly earthy, familiar, like home. Xie Lian's eyes are closed beneath the bandages, and still they sting. He misses his mother, misses his friends, misses the way things were, but he would have missed these arms, even if they never held him. They're trembling with hesitation, like he's worried about Xie Lian's reaction, half expecting to be shoved away. But when Xie Lian's arms move, it's only to wrap around the boy in return. He doesn't weep, no, but he sags, allowing the teenager to bear his weight. Having one of his senses sealed means every other sensation becomes all the more important. Xie Lian learns to love the sound of the birds in the trees, the rush of wind through the grass, the sound of Hongar's breathing, learning to trace the way it changes with emotion. He becomes keenly aware of different smells, good and bad. He can track a demon for miles, and certain perfumes give him such a terrible headache he can barely stand to be in the same room. But Hongar's smell? It soothes him, puts him at ease at night when he tries to sleep. Taste? Well, he was already unlucky in that sense, but hunger has cured a sensitive palate. He's a little spoiled these days. Only has to eat what his companion cooks for him. And that he never minds. But Xie Lian never realized how much he could come to adore touch. He always hears Hongar coming, but the boy has taken to greeting him with a gentle squeeze of his shoulder. When he feels Xie Lian get tense, he always reaches for the god's hand, squeezing softly. His fingers are rougher than Xie Lian's, longer than they used to be. Familiar. There was a time where he could barely seem to stand sleeping beside him, shrinking to the far side of the bamboo mat. Now Xie Lian falls asleep each night with the young man's warmth against his back. It's never too intimate, just that constant reminder of his presence. He has nightmares sometimes. He used to wake up alone, trembling, covering his hands with his mouth, whimpering against the dark. Now he awakens to arms wrapped firmly around him, a voice whispering into his hair. They aren't real, Diansha. Xie Lian's eyes stare, unseeing. His breaths are shallow, unsteady. He's pathetic, a frightened, broken shadow of the man that he once was. When did those arms become so strong? It's just a dream. Xie Lian's lips tremble, and the shadow of a feeling stirs inside of him, one that he's quick to push down. He notices all of the little ways that his companion was touching him before, when he wasn't paying attention. Xie Lian has gotten pretty good at navigating without his sight, but he still stumbles when he walks an unfamiliar path, and when he does, Hongar is always there, catching him by the elbow, one hand on his back to steady him. Careful, Gugger. One of his favorite things in the world is combing Xie Lian's hair. He still laughs with childlike delight whenever the god agrees, spending hours carefully working through every single tangle. He even learns some of the fanciest styles that the prince used to wear. Even if Xie Lian no longer has the fancy hair pieces or pins that he used to, the god smiles with assurance, assures the boy that isn't necessary. But it makes Hongar happy, so he could never tell him no. He isn't quite as skilled as Mucheng used to be, but far more gentle, to the point where Xie Lian ends up slumped back against him, purring like a contented house cat. He never sees how flushed Hongar gets, the breathless way he smiles, like he's been given a precious gift. Seasons pass, and Xie Lian hasn't thought about his cultivation. He learns to forget the way his name sounds from anyone but Hongar's lips. Part of him wonders if he's being a coward, hiding from the world, hiding from his mistakes. He has moments of guilt, shame, and sorrow. What about the people who looked to him? Everyone that he let down. What of his parents? He doesn't even know where they are now. And he knows Feng Xin wouldn't have allowed any harm to come to them. But how can Xie Lian justify allowing himself to be happy? It takes him time to realize that's what the feeling inside of him is whenever he has Hongar by his side. This lightness, when he hears the teenager's voice dropping lower with every passing week, becoming that of a man. He used to spend each day silently worrying, fretting over how to hide his weaknesses, how to be someone worth following, because if he wasn't, Hongar would leave. That was just assured. One day, it would happen. After a year together, Xie Lian is starting to realize that it won't. That this is more than happiness. Xie Lian begins to recognize it as love, knowing that it isn't the romantic kind. After all, Hongar is still just a boy, yet to live a life of his own. But Xie Lian does realize that he's given the teenager something through their companionship. Comfort, stability, guidance. And for someone who grew up without a home, without a family, being with Xie Lian has allowed him to finish out those latter childhood years with someone who cared for him. Xie Lian knows he gave him that, and he'll always be grateful for what the young man has given him. But part of loving someone is wanting what's best for them, even when it isn't what you want, even if it hurts. Xie Lian knows Hongar will follow him for the rest of his life if the god doesn't stop him. And while this is more happiness than Xie Lian could have hoped for, Hongar could have more. He deserves more. He should have more. For so many months, Xie Lian would cling when the boy shrunk away, begging him not to leave. Now he's encouraging him to do just that, to move on, to have a life of his own, to stop wasting his life on Xie Lian. The suggestion that it could be a waste always makes the young man angry. Have I ever told Gogo that I wanted to leave? No. Does Gogo want me gone? Xie Lian swallows thickly, shaking his head. No, it's not about wanting you gone, Hongar. Then I'm staying. They've never argued before. Hongar never dared to contradict him. But the one thing they never agree on is the one thing that he can never back down from, that Xie Lian is worth it. And it makes the gods so frustrated, because Hongar is throwing so much away. Don't you even understand the kind of life you could have? Xie Lian snaps one day, hands balling into fists. He's never raised his voice to the boy, not like this. Do you have any idea how special you are? And God, he's so stubborn. If I'm special, it's because of... Don't you dare say it's because of me. He stands quickly, his weaving forgotten, tossed aside. I've barely given you anything, Hongar. If anything, I've slowed you down. Every good thing about you, it's in spite of me. Can't you see that? He's cursed everyone in his life. His family, his country, his people. He'll curse Hongar soon too, if he isn't careful. How? How could he be this selfish? When the boy speaks again, his voice is small, and to Xie Lian's horror, hurt. How could you say that it's nothing? The god freezes, falling silent. His eyes grow wide, and he realizes how that sounded. Whatever he meant, even if he didn't intend it, Take me as you reason. He can't see how wide Hongar's eyes are, but he can feel the waves of hurt coming off of him. If you can't find a reason to live, live for me. In the intervening years, Xie Lian had forgotten where they started. That when Hongar was the one that was downtrodden, alone, Told that he was cursed, Xie Lian was the one that lifted him up. Those words, which often seem so foolish to him, they define Hongar's entire world. And now Xie Lian is practically spitting on that, telling Hongar that it meant nothing, that his reason, it's actually meaningless. When he realizes that, the god's heart fills with nothing but shame and self-loathing, and against his own teachings, he falls to his knees. "I'm sorry," he chokes, arms wrapped around himself as he hangs his head with shame. As a prince, he was always told to hold his head high, that he never needed to bow before anyone. The first time in his life that he kneels like this. It's for an orphan, someone with nothing. "Hongar, he gasps, fighting back tears. "I am so sorry." But he isn't kneeling on his own for long. He's in a familiar set of arms, taking shame in the comfort he finds in being held, knowing he's the last person to deserve it. Hongar doesn't acknowledge his apologies. He just repeats the one thing he always has, that he won't leave, that he won't ever want to. This is where he wants to be, and Xie Lian can never understand it. He reminds the young man that he could ascend, and Hongar scoffs, not believing in that possibility, and even so. "If the heavens are too stupid to want Diansha, why would I want anything to do with them?" he huffs, arms tightening around Xie Lian's shoulder. "I wouldn't fit in anyway. I have better taste." The disgraced official smiles weakly, choking out laughter. Shameless. But his hand comes up to rest in Hongar's hair anyway, not ruffling it like he used to, just stroking gently, and Hongar hums in acknowledgement, leaning into his touch. Gogo always forgives me for it. Xie Lian could forgive him for anything. Hongar makes it so easy to do. But he makes other points, ones that aren't so easy to deny. That Hongar won't be able to find someone if he spends his life like this, caring for a blind man in a dusty, forgotten shrine. He won't have a family of his own. "I don't need more than this," he repeats every time. Xie Lian doesn't accept that quite so easily. After all, he knows why he chose his own path. But Hongar, he isn't a prince, and he doesn't have the exact same predicament as Xie Lian. There's no reason that he couldn't find a partner, that he couldn't be happy. When the god presses him on that point eventually, Hongar offers a reply that makes him stop, his eyes a little wide underneath the bandages. "What makes you think anyone would want me?" Xie Lian freezes, his face a mask of confusion. "I don't understand what you mean." Hongar's voice is wry, but the security beneath it is real. It runs deep. "I'm not like you, Diansha." Xie Lian laughs quietly, tilting his head to the side. "You don't need to tell me that we're different people, Hongar, but that doesn't mean I'm not beautiful." Finally, the god falls silent. The implication that Hongar finds him beautiful isn't lost on him, and his feelings around that are complicated. There was a time when Xie Lian always felt beautiful. The world was always telling him so. And how far did that beauty get him? When things got ugly, what did the beauty of his face bring him? Did it keep his believers behind him? No. To love something only for the beauty of it is cheap. Xie Lian learned that the hard way. "Do you only follow me because you find me beautiful, Hongar?" He doesn't answer verbally, but Xie Lian can feel the movement of him shaking his head from how vehement it is. Then why do you think that such a thing could stop anyone from loving you? Xie Lian suspects that the young man's worry isn't founded as it is. He might be blind, but he isn't deaf. He's heard girls sighing and fawning over him when he walks by the street. Oddly enough, many whisper about the fact that he looks dangerous, which Xie Lian finds odd. He can't imagine the teenager that way. But dangerous isn't the same thing as ugly. It used to amuse him. Lately, it's been less funny, even though he can't place why. Most people aren't like me, Gugu. Oh. Xie Lian's lips quirk up, somewhat wry. The first compliment the young man is willing to give himself, and it's only to justify why no one could ever love him. He moves a little closer, pulling his arms back. Hongar came to sit back before, when he was comforting Xie Lian, leaning back against the stone wall of the shrine. The god sits up a little, his expression serious. All right, let me see then. Hongar stares back at him, confused, half wondering if the god is about to pull the bandages off and say, "Surprise, I was just testing you the whole time." But he doesn't. He moves closer, not really thinking about, well, the fact that the action leaves him straddling the teenager's lap. Not pressing against him, he's up on his knees, but Hongar's breathing quickens and his heartbeat pounds, hands trembling and balling up in his lap. He's only 17, after all. And this? It's a lot. Xie Lian's palms press against his cheeks, leaving him even more mortified by the heat there. But the god doesn't comment on that. Instead, he brushes his thumbs over the bandages, his voice tinged with worry. Are you hurt, Hongar? He remembers the boy had bandages before, but both times he was already injured. Does he wear them all the time? It's quiet, and the teenager answers, his voice is small. No. Xie Lian frowns, tugging at them gently. Can I? His breathing is shallow, and his head is spinning, but Hongar nods. He's careful, unwinding the bandages that cover most of the right side of his face, setting them down on the floor beside them. The boy stays perfectly still, trying to make it easier. But Xie Lian's heart aches when he feels how the young man is shaking, how nervous he is. Of course, bless him, Xie Lian is completely misinterpreting the reason for the nervousness. His fingertips begin the slow, purposeful process of tracing Hongar's face. It's different from the little boy he remembers. His jaw is a little more square, his cheekbones sharp. He has soft, full lips that quiver under Xie Lian's thumbs, trying so hard to be good, to keep still for him. His chin is slightly pointed, probably from a need to gain weight. His eyes are evenly set, with long lashes fluttering like butterfly wings beneath his touch. Finely shaped brows, bangs that fall into his forehead so often that Xie Lian has to delicately push them away. Hongar's hair is slightly more coarse than his own, a little unruly, but Xie Lian doesn't dislike it. If anything, it makes him smile fondly. There are also things he can't see. The way Hongar's chest is heaving, just how dark and flushed his skin has become, pupils blown. He can hear the fast breathing, the rapid heartbeat, but he doesn't see the way the teenager is staring at his lips, how close their faces are. His nose is long, thin. There's a slight crookedness to it, and a bump in the bridge, like it's been broken many times before. There's texture on his skin, but not from teenage acne, like what Xie Lian might have expected, no. There's scars, numerous, some of them deep, But those things aren't ugly. Xie Lian has learned to scoff at things that are gleaming, unblemished, and new. He was, once, still is in many ways. This body constantly erases any reminder of his past. The small signs of wear and tear on the teenager's face, they're a story. One that he doubts Hongar would ever be willing to tell. But they aren't ugly. The teenager's breaths are shallow as he watches the god's face, waiting for Xie Lian to laugh it off awkwardly, to give a kind but fake compliment, or say something about Hongar's personality. But the smile never leaves his face. It only softens, deepens, with a warm kind of affection that Hongar has only known from his god's lips, and he murmurs, "Handsome." Hongar's rushed, unsteady breathing halts, and Xie Lian leans forward, thumbs stroking over his follower's cheeks. He's never done more than hug Hongar, always careful to keep some degree of separation there. And this, it's the sort of touch he's always dreamed of receiving from his god, the kind he's always been too ashamed of wanting to ask for. The god's lips press against his forehead. "My handsome, brave Hongar." The teenager lets out a shuddering sigh, his eyes flooding with tears. It doesn't sound like a lie. He knows it must be, but it sounds so sincere. He doesn't believe him. Hongar squeezes his eyes shut, allowing Xie Lian to hold him tight. He'll always believe in his god. Follow him to the ends of the earth, no matter the cost, no matter what Xie Lian says or does. Hongar's faith is blind, unending. But he doesn't believe it when Xie Lian says that he's handsome. Brave, yes. Hongar's always been brave. It's easy to be brave when you've already lived through the worst of what the world can do. But Hongar knows that he's ugly. He's always been ugly. That's why all of this happened. Why he... My Hongar. Oh. Even if one word was a lie. My. Did he mean it like that? The teenager's heart is still beating unsteadily later, when his god is sleeping in his arms, one hand still resting over the boy's cheek, light, fond. Please, did he really mean that? Even if he isn't handsome, could Xie Lian have meant the rest? Could he, someone with nothing, no luck, wealth, power, not even a name, could he be worthy of even belonging to someone like him? Deserving? Certainly not. But in some act of madness, could Xie Lian want that anyway? Then movement in the night cuts through his thoughts. Xie Lian was born a prince, rose to become a god, then fell again. And in all of that time, and the years that would follow, he would say that his happiest year was when he had nothing, when he was penniless and lame, sleeping in an abandoned, dusty shrine, not because of any shining moral platitude or grand realization about how wealth and fame meant nothing. No, just because of the boy that was sleeping beside him, the boy that believed in him, the boy that saved him, who stayed beside him. Xie Lian should have made him leave. He should have remembered what he was, what loving him could do to a person, the damage his mere presence could cause. But he didn't. He was so desperate for companionship, for someone to care, and Hongar's devotion was like a drug. It made him relax, and it made him forget. For the first time in months, He wakes up alone.